Last week, we talked about different types of maps and what they can teach us about the Earth's surface. Well, this week, we're going to keep learning about the Earth's surface by talking about landforms. Some examples of landforms are mountains, hills, and islands. But before we go too much further into different types of landforms, let's talk about why landforms are important. Now, first, landforms are important because they impact human settlement. When settlers from England crossed the Atlantic and set up the American colonies, they started expanding west but then stopped at the Appalachian Mountains. Why? Well, the mountains created a barrier. It was hard to communicate and travel over the mountains. Now, eventually, the colonies declared their independence from England and they expanded all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But for a long time, the mountains created a very real barrier to further settlement. Another reason landforms are important is because landforms impact human culture. This is the European country of Greece. Now, when we look at Greek history, it's kind of interesting because there are cities that are not very far away, but they're very different from each other. They have very different cultures. Now, why would that be? Well, when we start looking at the landforms and the geography of Greece, we start to understand. Greece is covered in mountains, okay? And those mountains create barriers. It's hard for people to communicate and travel and exchange ideas with each other, okay? So that's why a lot of these cities developed without each other, alone, apart from each other, independently, okay? They didn't share their cultures a lot because they had that barrier in between them. So that's another reason landforms are important. Now that we've talked about two reasons landforms are important, let's go on to talk about different types of landforms. Now, first, we have the coast, or the shore. That's land that touches water. Sometimes it'll be called the coastline or the shoreline because it's like the line that separates land on one side from water on the other. I want you to put this definition for coast of shore under the definition part of part 1 on your chart. Now, next we're going to talk about islands. An island is land that is completely surrounded by water. In this picture, you see one example, but let's look at some famous islands of the world. Here in Europe, we have the country of England, all right? And you see England is completely surrounded by water, which it means it's cut off from the rest of Europe, and that makes it an island. Another example of a famous island, let's look over here in the ocean. We see the islands of Hawaii. Now, Hawaii is made up of several different islands, but all the land is completely surrounded by water, and that's what makes it an island, okay? I want you to notice that we have a map that shows us, using colors, how high or low the land is. What kind of map would that be? Next, we're going to talk about peninsulas, all right? Peninsulas are surrounded by water on 3 sides, okay? Not like an island that's completely surrounded by water, only on 3 sides. Some famous peninsulas of the world. Well, let's go to the United States, and we'll look at the state of Florida, okay? That picture of the coast we saw earlier was a picture of Florida, and it's no mystery why Florida has so many coasts, because it's almost completely surrounded by water. Not completely, almost. If it were completely surrounded, it would be an island, but it's not. It's a peninsula. Another famous peninsula in the world, do you remember that European country, one of those European countries that sent so many folks, explorers, trying to find a trade route to China and India? That country would be Spain, all right? And Spain is also a peninsula, almost completely surrounded by water, but not quite. It's connected by France to the rest of Europe, unlike Britain, which is an island. Now, next we'll talk about gulfs, all right? Now, a gulf is like the opposite of a peninsula. A peninsula is land almost completely surrounded by water, where a gulf is water almost completely surrounded by land, okay? Famous gulfs of the world, just so we can see another example and help us learn gulfs. The Gulf of Mexico here in North America. Now we see Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Mexico, a few other states that almost completely surround it, but don't completely surround it, and that's what makes it a gulf. Lakes. A lake is water that's completely surrounded by land, all right? A gulf is partly surrounded, a lake is completely surrounded, okay? Famous lakes of the world. Let's go to our home continent of North America and the good old US of A. And we have the Great Lakes, okay? They're up here in the north part of the country, a little to the east. And we can see, this is actually a photograph. You can see them from space. They're so big. That's why we call them the Great Lakes. But as big as they are still completely surrounded by land, okay? And that's what makes them lakes. What do you see here? Next, we'll talk about swamps. Now, swamps are low, wet land, all right? They're also called marshes or wetlands. I really like this word wetlands because it really describes what a swamp is. It's wet land. Look at the picture. Wet land. All right. So wetlands to me is most helpful, but you will also need to know the word marshes and swamps. Go ahead and put that definition on your worksheet. Now, where are the wetlands in the United States? Well, we actually find them in our own backyard here in New Orleans near the Mississippi River. We also see many in Florida. We also see many in the southeastern part of the United States on the coast. Rivers. Okay. Now, rivers are extra important because they help people travel and trade. Before there were highways, people traveled and traded using rivers. Okay? So, in another example of how landforms and geography impact settlement, we see port cities are built on rivers. Okay? What's a port city? A port is a town or city where ships can load or unload. Okay? So, New Orleans is a port city. New York is a port city. Many port cities have harbors, which are protected areas on the coast where ships can pull up and they'll be protected from waves and storms. Okay, this is New York Harbor. Okay, New York is a port and a harbor. So to review, rivers are probably one of the most important landforms we talked about. Rivers are good for trade. Many of the cities in the colonies were set up on rivers so that they'd be good for trade. Rivers are also important for natural resources. So rivers are full of fresh water, which is not only good for drinking, but it's good for watering plants. Rivers also attract animals to drink the fresh water, and that's good for hunting and furs, okay? So trade and natural resources are two reasons that rivers are very important and why most people settle on rivers, okay? Well, that's all today for landforms, but we're going to talk about more landforms next time. Go ahead and complete parts 2 and 3 on your worksheet, okay? Until next time.